12, 1951, Clay County, Kentucky. 3 men from Harlan, Leonard, Pike, Thomas, Reeves, and Jody Ellsworth, signed out equipment from the Kentucky Spelunkers Registry just past dawn. Their stated destination was privately accessed limestone fault under Gallows Cradle, a cave system marked defunct after the 37 flood, its name surviving only in the footnotes of geological maps and whispered warnings among the older miners. A side path choked by sedge and black pine left off the newer survey charts. No trail markers, no warnings, just a red X from a 1918 mine ledger, and a story about a preacher's boy who wandered in and never returned, according to a sealed 1953 field report. The men entered the sink around 9 a.m. The report doesn't say how deep they went, but it does list what they left behind. 60 feet below the surface, the search team discovered their boots, all 6, mud-stained, dry, arranged in a perfect circle. Inside the circle, nothing. No bones, no clothing, no prints leading in or out. Their nylon ropes had been severed mid-length, burned through like acid had eaten the core. The cut ends curled like veins. They glowed. Slightly under the rescue team's UV light, and on the back wall of that pocket, nailed between veins of quartz and soot, was a prayer card, blood-stained. The face of Christ had been scratched out. One word was carved across his forehead. In jagged ink, returned. The document, labeled Field Log 187B, Geological Anomaly Report, was never released to the press. It was archived 2 years later under State Statute 187B, Hazardous Unnatural Sites. Archive with caution. A law enacted after the 1948 Pine Hollow incident, where a sinkhole swallowed a town car during a funeral procession, and the bodies were never recovered. That file was buried deep in the restricted archives of the Kentucky Geological Survey until it was accidentally reopened in 1999, part of a digitization initiative that misflagged the box. That's when a junior technician flagged a photo of the prayer card. She uploaded it to a geological database forum, asking for translation help, assuming returned was some misrendered Latin. Within 12 hours, the thread was gone. Not deleted, erased, like it had never existed. Her IP was blacklisted by the state's internal server, and she was quietly dismissed 2 weeks later, but her file got out. A single printout survived, photocopied and mailed to a Spelunkers mailing list in Boone County. That's how this story began to leak. Leonard Pike's family never held a funeral. His sister Ruth kept a wooden box under her bed until she died in 1982. Inside were 3 things: a scrap of burned nylon, a folded map with "Do Not Follow" scrawled in red over Gallows Cradle, and a short letter with no salutation. Just 6 words. Don't listen when the rocks hum. It's easy to call this madness, a shared psychotic break, the dangers of amateur caving. That's what the local papers said, though few ever mentioned the story at all, and none explained why Clay County temporarily closed 5 public trails for unspecified terrain instability for exactly 13 days following the incident. But go deeper into the land records, and stranger things start to show. A 1937 ownership deed was filed for parcel for 1BA segment that includes Gallows Cradle under the name Elias Verne. No address, no prior ownership chain. What's more, Elias Verne is listed again in 1956, purchasing mineral rights to the same parcel from the same notary, despite the previous record already establishing him as owner. The signature, identical. Not just the name, the handwriting, The pressure points. A forensic analyst reviewing the documents in 2004 said it was like the pen had never left the hand, 18 years apart. What kind of person buys the same land twice? Who signs with the exact same stroke years later? The 1951 cave event wasn't the first anomaly, and it wasn't the last, but it's the one that was documented officially, carefully, and then deliberately sealed. What the reports don't mention is that the Gallows Cradle Cave isn't just a cave, it's a fold. A geological term for a collapsed or warping. Rocked, but here, the locals meant it differently. They called it Cold Mother's Teeth. According to an oral history transcript archived in the University of Kentucky Folklore Department, Cold Mother's Teeth was said to chew names, not bodies. That's why no one finds bones. It don't eat flesh. It eats story. The tales go back to Civil War deserters hiding in the gorge, to a preacher who led 12 followers into the cavern and was the only one to come out, white-haired, blind, and unable to speak above a whisper for the rest of his life. A 1904 field journal kept by a traveling midwife records a stillbirth. Near the cave mouth, the baby born with closed ears and skin like polished shale. The entry ends with a phrase, "Didn't cry, didn't breathe." Still, she whispered, this wasn't folklore passed like legend. It was knowledge held close, like shame. Generational, inherited, not discussed, warned. And yet, the deeper the records go, the more the pattern emerges. Every 40 to 50 years, someone disappears into that land. Always near a cave. Always after a storm. And there's always a note, a symbol, a scrap of something, enough to remember, but never enough to explain. So what was it? A hallucination? Shaped by religious hysteria? A series of accidents tied together by grief? Or something older than belief? Something so deeply rooted in the hills that the rock itself remembers what the living do not? In 2001, a FEMA excavation team investigated a new sinkhole opening just 6 miles south of Gallows Cradle. The lead geologist, Dr. Eleonora Braddock, filed a single-page anomaly report. The walls are warm to the touch. There is vibration, like a heart murmur through the earth. The soil speaks pressure, like something is holding its breath. That report was redacted and refiled. The site was deemed unstable and quietly reclassified as a restricted zone. But what if it's not instability? What if it's a rhythm, a cycle, a pull? 3 men walked into Gallows Cradle in 1951. They left no tracks, no screams, just boots arranged like a ritual or a welcome sealed rope, curled ends, blood on a scratched-out saint, and silence. Always silence. Sometimes history doesn't forget. It waits in files no one was meant to find. In boots no one unlaced. In caves that never stop humming. And it waits in you, in your name, your memories, your family's silence. If you've ever seen a lantern flicker where no wind blew. If your grandmother warned you never to follow creeks at dusk. If you've heard of Cold Mother's Teeth, or found a map with red X's where there should be none, then write it, let it be known, let it breathe again, and subscribe, because every comment seals another file. And this time, they may not be able to erase it. To find Breath Hollow, you won't need a compass, just silence. A silence so thick it swallows engine noise. Where cell signals vanish halfway up the ridge, and birds stop mid-song like the melody's been taken from them, located somewhere, between the ridgelines of McDowell County and the slumped timber valleys near Panther State Forest. Breath Hollow doesn't appear on any modern GPS. It's not technically abandoned, it was never formally acknowledged, no census, no charter, no incorporation documents filed. And yet, in the Clay County Land Usage Archive, Parcel 1 to 8B is listed year after year with the same description: private stewardship, religious exemption, inhabited, no municipal oversight. It was never a town in the way cities define it. No street signs, no power lines, but it had people, or at least it used to. A 1911 school registry for First Hollow Elementary lists 23 students from the Breath Hollow vicinity, 8 surnames, all repeated: Colden, Ashby, Verne, Maddox, Rowan, McCree, Sturgill, and Greaves. None of those names appear in the school's records after 1927. According to the McDowell County Tax Ledger from 1932, the land was as inhabited religious land, with no public access permitted. The audit note simply reads, "Church land, no taxes due, keep off." In theory, that shouldn't be possible. The separation of church and state prevents permanent religious settlements from operating without oversight. But in the folds of these Appalachian ridgelines, where poverty, isolation, and terrain converge, legal theory gives way to something more ancient. Land governed not by laws, but by remembered warnings. Between 1933 and 1959, 8 mail carriers filed formal route refusals for the Breath Hollow perimeter. The records don't cite danger, they cite instability. One 1947 entry reads, "Cabins appear occupied, but no response to hails. Mailboxes emptied, but never moved. One box nailed shut from inside." The same year, a forestry report flagged a portion of land due south of Panther Ridge for suspected illegal hunting. Rangers reported the sound of hymnals echoing through the trees, not recorded music, but human voices in unison. The patrol never found the source, but one ranger, Jacob Mullins, filed a separate log, never submitted to the official record, but found decades later among his effects after his death in 1988, there were women standing in the stream, not washing clothes, just standing, eyes open, facing the water like it was going to speak, and something about the silence was off. It wasn't peaceful. It was listening. In 1961, a man named Rufus Sturgill, the last person on county record to list his address as Upper Hollow, Route 0, was admitted to a Stratron psychiatric ward after being found wandering barefoot on the Panther Ridge logging trail. He was uninjured, dehydrated, repeating the phrase, the mouth opened, "I didn't go in." His intake form lists his place of birth as Breath Hollow. The attending nurse penciled a question mark next to it, and a staff note scribbled. In the margin, in different handwriting, says, "We weren't supposed to write that name down, but people did. Not in books, in margins. In Bibles passed down through families. In the back pages of hymnals and family photo albums with missing faces. The way a town disappears isn't through fire or flood. It's through quiet consent." Breath Hollow was erased with nods, with folded papers, with names unspoken. Not because the place was lost, but because it was agreed to be forgotten, and what survives now are only scraps, fragments that keep resisting full burial. A 1972 topographical map of McDowell County, revised by a student intern at Marshall University, includes a faint grey outline of roads no longer listed. A single note is penciled next to the faintest curve of switchback path, old school ruins, still smells like chalk. Another breadcrumb came in the form of an obituary. May 14, 1983, Charleston Gazette. Lillian Colden Ashby, age 94. survived by no known relatives. Services to be held back home, weather permitting. When the paper tried to print the location of burial, the press malfunctioned. That edition, and only that page, printed, with a black smear over the town's name. A typesetter later admitted, the letters were in the press, but they wouldn't print. If you dig further, the pattern sharpens. Colden appears again in 1991, when an off-grid birth certificate is filed for a child born to M. Colden in the region of Breath Hollow. The state file is flagged. The clerk who processed it left a note, does not match any current township or zone, advise deletion. But the name stayed in the system, frozen like a ghost left half-written. What was Breath Hollow? Some say it was a cult, others a failed commune. But local oral history says it was older than that. That the first people who lived in the hollow weren't settlers, they were watchers, and the caves were not something they found. They were something they were placed beside. A retired coal miner, Everett Hensley, told a WPA field researcher in 1941, "My daddy said, not to shout in the gorge, said the sound goes down, not out, said the caves ain't holes. There, mouths, you don't scream into a mouth, you whisper." In 2006, a travel blogger attempted to find the town, a man named Brendan Fletcher. He posted a 12-part series documenting his route into what he believed was the Breath Hollow region. His last post was titled, "The Path Curves Where the Map is Flat." He was found 2 weeks later, shoeless, wandering Route 83 near Grundy. He'd written one phrase on his shirt in black ash: "They still live under the house." His footage was never recovered. His posts were deleted after his hospitalization. His YouTube channel no longer exists, but the outline of his face, visible in an archived thumbnail, showed him standing in front of a structure no one could place. A cabin where the boards were too smooth, too untouched. A door with no handle. What kind of place survives only in the gaps between documents? Breath Hollow is not on the map, but every few years a person stumbles into it. Not intentionally. Never directly. Always sideways. A shortcut during a storm. A trail camera showing footage of a deer looking left and vanishing. A hiker's journal that mentions the people in the orchard, barefoot, humming in the fog. These aren't fictional accounts. These are filed observations, public records, and stray testimonies, dismissed because there's no category to contain them. And if you look at the last documented residents of Breath Hollow, Verns, Sturgills, you'll see something else. They don't appear in any national death index. Not one, as if they never died, as if they're still there, as if the town never ended, just closed its eyes. If your family once spoke of a cabin on the edge of a gorge, if your great-grandmother's Bible had names that no one dared speak aloud, if you've ever seen a road that ends before it should, then tell us, leave a comment, let the land remember itself, and subscribe, because every person who speaks helps rebuild the map they tried to the Colden. Surname should have faded like so many others did in the Appalachians, worn thin by coal dust, poverty, and migration. It first appears in an 1898 school roll call for Breath Hollow's one-room schoolhouse. For children, Amos, Lillian, Enoch, and Ruth Colden. Their attendance is marked in thin graphite ticks beside each name, week after week, until 1903. Then, the names vanish. Not crossed out, just gone. No transfer notice, no move filed. But in that same year's census, the Colden household is still listed as occupied, with the note: no response, curtains drawn, smoke visible. That was the beginning of the forgetting. By 1927, county property tax ledgers show the Colden parcel listed under religious exemption, non-taxable parcel 1 to 8B. The reason, congregational exemption. But no church was ever registered. At that location, the field officer who filed the document, Herbert McCrae, later left a handwritten annotation in the margin, nearly illegible under faded ink. They tithe in silence. No collection plates. Eyes like caves. The Coldens weren't the only ones. In parallel towns, Ash Grove, Drylick, Devil's Knob, the surname appears briefly in marriage records, deed transfers, and school rosters. Always briefly, always inconsistently, as if they surfaced for just long enough to be written down, and then receded again into the hollows. But there's one place the name appears without interruption, in missing persons logs. Between 1912 and 1974, the name Colden shows up 12 times in reports filed by our Tuvetown relatives, missionaries, or occasional phrases like, "My cousin went to visit the Coldens in the Hollow, never returned. Last known letter sent from C.O., Colden family, Old Orchard Road, Breath Hollow, postmark incomplete. Reported seeing a Colden child singing barefoot. In the rain, couldn't follow her. Fog closed in." In each case, no formal investigation was opened. In most, the record was later marked, no longer considered active. One sheriff, Harlan County, 1959, simply wrote, "We don't look for those ones. They already know where they are." But sometimes, they didn't vanish entirely. In 1975, a man named Elias Colden was picked up for trespassing on a federal construction site outside of Panther Ridge. No ID, no fingerprints on file. When asked for his date of birth, he replied, "October. Don't know the year." He was estimated to be around 50. Medical records taken at the time note unusual scarring across the soles of his feet, as if he'd walked barefoot on hot stone. His pupils were described as contracted but reactive. When shown a flashlight, he recoiled and murmured. They said never bring fire inside the mouth. The intake nurse, Carla Foy, kept a personal journal that year. In an unpublished entry dated September 12th, she wrote, "He smells like minerals and pine, like someone buried in stone. He hums to himself, but not a melody, it sounds like." Breathing. After 5 days, Elias Colden was transferred to a psychiatric facility in Barbersville. 3 days later, he escaped. No official alert was sent. The file was closed under a temporary hold status and never reopened. In 1989, a kindergarten class in Logan County submitted a series of art projects about family trees. One child, name redacted in archived files, drew a root system. Instead, the roots were labeled with names: Lillian, Amos, Ruth, Colden. The teacher flagged the drawing and contacted Child Services. According to the report, when asked where these people lived, the child replied, "They live under the old orchard they sing at night." They don't get old. That orchard appears again in a 1921 agricultural survey, part of a land tract owned by the Colden family. The survey notes, fruit yield unstable, trees appear healthy but do not flower, and beneath it, another curious note, all the birds here are silent. So, who were the Coldens really? There are no military records, no driver's licenses, no utility bills or hospital discharge papers. But there are records of land ownership. At least 5 deeds trace back to Colden hands, all still technically active, and all unclaimed for decades, and on each, the signature block is filled with the same notation, signed in person, no mark required, which implies presence, that someone stood before a notary, that someone signed with the weight of memory still intact. Folklore paints them in half-light. Some call them guardians, watchers of the caves. Others call them bloodkeepers, a term rooted in regional superstition about those tasked with feeding old gods, not through sacrifice, but through story, secrecy, and silence. An elderly resident of Drylick, 93-year-old Harlan Maynard, told a researcher in 2005, "You ain't supposed to know the if you do, they start singing in your dreams, and then you'll know the way back. And once you know the way, you'll walk it." And people have, always alone, always at dusk, always barefoot, as if something in their blood remembered what the boots forgot. There's a kind of horror that doesn't come from violence, but from inheritance. The Coldens didn't just disappear. They were never allowed to be remembered. But like the caves, they don't need sunlight to endure. They are remembered in roots, in names murmured once at birth and never again, in land that grows nothing, but feels full. And what if the Coldens weren't just a family? What if they were a role, a title, a lineage, not of blood, but of function? What if some families were never meant to be known, because their work was to watch and to be forgotten? If your attic holds a photo with names that never made it to your family tree, if your grandmother warned you not to ask about the Coldens, or if your childhood home had a room that always stayed locked, then tell us. Let the names surface. Let the land speak again. And subscribe, because some families live only through memory, and silence is how we kill them. Asterisk. There are things that call themselves churches in Appalachia, and things that only wear the name. By the time outsiders reached Breath Hollow in the early 20th century, most traditional institutions had withered. The schools closed, the stores emptied, but the chapel remained. Not because it was used, but because it was obeyed. There are only 2 photographs known to exist of the Hollows Meeting House, both from 1916. The building appears wooden, windowless, its steeple warped as if bending toward the earth. No cross, no signage, no name. In the second photo, a child stands beside the door, barefoot, holding a length of rope. Behind her, the door bears 6 slashes in the wood, deep, deliberate, evenly spaced. The structure's real name was never written down, but in 1937, a traveling Baptist preacher named Merrick Thomas noted in his field diary, "They call it the listening house. Their God does not rise. He waits below. They pray down, not up." That entry was recovered decades later, water-stained and brittle, in a box of unclaimed belongings at a Charleston estate sale. It was found alongside a hand-copied hymnal, written in 2 columns, one in English, the other in a cipher that linguists have yet to decode. Some of the melodies match known Baptist refrains, others are marked as songs of dissent. These include verses written in a meter meant to be chanted, not sung, with instructions like, "Kneel with soles up. Do not breathe on the second refrain. Mothers shall hush the smallest." First 1 page features an illustration of a cavern mouth surrounded by roots. Above it, the words, "The hollow mouth is fed by memory." These weren't sermons. These were instructions, a notebook, recovered in 1981 from the ruins of the church basement, after a brush fire cleared part of the ridge, reveals what local children were taught. On the inside cover, Lessons for Stillness, Year 3, each page lists verses. behavioral rules, and what appear to be memory drills. If the door knocks once, answer not. If it knocks twice, answer not. If it knocks 3 times, let your name go. Repeat your name backwards until the knocking ends. You are not to follow a crying voice unless it calls you by your unborn name. Some pages are torn. One bears fingerprints in what forensic analysts confirmed was animal blood, most likely goat or deer. A page in the center of the notebook is missing. All that remains is a jagged edge and one phrase written across the margin: do not take fire into the teeth. The church had no bell, no baptistry. But in 1942, a woman named Della Macabre, who worked as a midwife throughout the Appalachian coal towns, made a report to the Harlan County Health Office. She said she was called to assist a birth in Breath Hollow. Upon arriving, she was told the child had already been born, but the mother wasn't allowed to speak. Her tongue had been bound in cloth. The child was silent, not stillborn, but not crying. The women present were humming. Della's notes were sparse, but one line stood out: no light, no joy, just the weight of watching. That report was filed and lost. It reappeared in 1989 during a digitization project. The original report was mislabeled as animal welfare complaint. When state investigators attempted to revisit the church site in the 1990s, they found the building had collapsed, not due to weather or erosion, but by design. The beams had been removed systematically, as if to lower the structure into itself, but the basement remained, and inside it a small sealed room, no wider than a pantry with stone walls. Instead of wood, inside that room were bones, dozens of them, not human, all small mammals, arranged in concentric circles. Each skull had its jaw removed, and on the far wall, scratched into stone, the word, "Listen." The church didn't just preach a gospel. It enforced a memory. Hand-copied Bibles passed through the Colden and Verne families show signs of repeated redaction, verses removed or overwritten. One Bible, now archived at the University of Kentucky, contains this marginalia next to Psalms 139. He is not above, he is beneath, where bones speak and the earth answers. Another note next to Matthew 18:24, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, never more than 3, or the mouth begins to remember. Psychologists reviewing the materials in the 2000s referred to these belief systems as subterranean theology, a term coined for isolated Appalachian religious sects that believed not in divine elevation, but in sacred descent. The idea that God is not light, but pressure, not fire, but gravity, not judgment, but memory, and this memory demanded obedience, according to oral history. Children who broke ritual, who spoke when they shouldn't, or stepped into the caves without permission, weren't punished with beatings or scolding. They were made to dig, one layer at a time, quietly, not as punishment, but as atonement, until they heard the stone soften, as one surviving note claims, "When it breathes, you may stop." In 1954, a retired sheriff's deputy from Pike County, under condition of anonymity, said he once attempted to shut down the congregation after receiving a report of a girl missing in the hollow. When he arrived, he was met by a congregation standing outside the church, heads bowed, hands empty. No one spoke. He entered the basement alone. When he returned, he quit his post the next day. He refused to say what he saw, only that they weren't burying anything, they were feeding it. The truth is, we don't know what the Hollows people believed, only what they left behind. The rituals don't explain themselves. The songs don't resolve. The prayers are half-written, but the structures remain. The basement is still there. The room with the bones still echoes when stepped inside. And the word on the wall still waits in the dark. Asterisk. July 3rd, 1984. It was supposed to be a routine field excursion for the geology department at Berea College. 6 students, 1 professor, a local trail guide. The plan was to spend 2 days documenting mineral deposits and glacial formations. Along the Ashgrove Caverns, a lesser-known offshoot of the Panther Ridge Karst network, near the edge of what used to be Breath Hollow. It was a hot summer morning, thick with ground fog. The group signed into the forestry ledger at 7:44 a.m. They never signed back out. A rescue operation was launched 36 hours later, after radio silence from the professor and no contact from the students. What the search team found was not just unexpected, it was impossible. 3 of the students were located first, sitting in a wide clearing about a mile off the mapped route. They were barefoot, clothes torn but unbloodied, silent, unmoving. They were described as awake but unreachable. When touched, they flinched but said nothing. One of them had drawn small spirals in the dirt around her body. Hundreds of them, each no bigger than a coin. The other 3 students, including the professor and the guide, were never found. Rescuers reported no signs of struggle, but they did note something strange. All the trees in that clearing tilted slightly inward, like the wind had pushed them from all sides. Toward the center, in the middle of the spiral, was a single item not belonging to any of the students, a black cloth satchel. Inside were pages torn from a hymnal, burned at the corners, and a small, water-damaged photograph of what looked like the listening house. The Breath Hollow Chapel, long believed to have collapsed decades prior. Later that month, the college issued a statement that the group had encountered a weather-related disorientation incident and quietly shut down its field program in that region. What was never publicly addressed, but found in internal memos years later, was the taped-on an emergency radio log from the morning of July 3rd, records a brief transmission from the professor at 8:12 a.m. Static dominates the audio, but several words are audible. It's warm in here. Rocks hum. There's something under the transmission cuts. The rest is white noise. That audio was submitted with the official incident report, but was later redacted from the file. Only the transcript survived, misfiled in a separate folder labeled Equipment Malfunction. No further action. The 3 students recovered were admitted to a psychiatric care facility in Frankfurt. Their names were never released to the public. But in 2002, one of them, whose identity was confirmed through matched university records, was briefly interviewed. During a folklore survey for the Kentucky Oral History Project, she declined to speak about the event, but allowed the interviewer to view her sketchbook. Every page featured variations of the same image, a cave mouth ringed with teeth, not sharp, but blunt and rounded like molars. Inside, a small child, kneeling, eyes open, mouth closed. The page beneath the sketch bore a single phrase in cursive. It doesn't want us. It wants the remembering. Later, cross-referencing of geological surveys revealed something else. Ashgrove Caverns was not on the official state records until 1978, but an 1889 coal company chart, drawn before formal land reclassification, shows the same tunnels marked with an ominous symbol, a circle with a line through it. The legend at the bottom reads, "Do not enter, land unstable, sacred." This same symbol was found carved into the stone wall of an old Colden root cellar, unearthed after a 1997 landslide near Panther Ridge. The 1984 event wasn't an isolated case, but it was the first modern incident with surviving witnesses, and the first time authorities were forced to engage with what had long been dismissed as myth. It also opened doors in unexpected places. Following the Ashgrove disappearances, a series of FOIA requests filed by local journalist Janine Harbinger attempted to gain access to Breath Hollow land records and the geological files connected to Ashgrove caverns. All were denied, but one request, filed under a misclassified case code, returned a curious result: a 2-page document from 1953 titled Community Exception 1B, Faith-Based Site Reclassification. The document references the area, encompassing Breath Hollow and 5 other unnamed parcels of concern. It designates the region as non-eviction eligible, with the following note: congregational rituals predate township establishment. Removal not advised. Observe minimal disruption. This language suggests a state-level acknowledgement, not of illegality, but of containment. The people of the Hollow and the caves they built around were not ignored by the government. They were quarantined. The implication is chilling, that what happened in 1984 was not new. It was an expected reoccurrence, a cycle the state had long stopped trying to prevent and instead worked to isolate. What else might have been contained? What was so deeply rooted in the caves, in the rituals, in the names of families who no longer appear on death registries? That the best solution was to look away. The answer may lie in the map uncovered in 1999, a geological draft created by a WPA surveyor in the 1930s. It shows a branching system of cave mouths, most unnamed, but 6 are marked. 6 exact locations, each with a date, a family name, and a red line drawn through it. The last is labeled 1984 Ashgrove, Colden. The question mark wasn't added by the researcher. It was inked on the original. They knew. Someone always knew. Asterisk. In the official report, his name was listed as Jeremiah Stokes, -47 years old. Amateur spelunker, ex-miner, part-time history teacher at a small community college in Grundy, Virginia. But in online forums, he went by a different name, Lantern Below. Between 1998 and 2003, Stokes was a frequent contributor to a message board dedicated to Appalachian cave exploration, particularly unmapped pockets between Kentucky and Virginia coal territory. His posts were concise, technical, and heavily researched. He cross-referenced Civil War deserter routes with hydrological charts, tracing a pattern of non-recurring depressions in limestone formations, a polite term for sinkholes that appear and vanish with no seismic trigger. He was obsessed with one in particular, Coombs Sinkhole, located just outside the long-defunct mining camp of Sulphur Bend. The place hadn't been inhabited since the 1940s, abandoned after a slide blocked access. It was never resettled. Locals called it cursed. One old tale claimed a schoolhouse there collapsed straight down, not from rot or rain, but because it sat on a mouth that never closed. Jeremiah found this description in a 1912 church. Circular, not a newspaper, not an official record. A mimeographed flyer folded inside a community Bible auctioned at an estate sale in Lexington. He made a copy, highlighted the phrase, "God waits in hollers not built by hands," and posted it on the forum with a caption, "I think Breath Hollow was just one of 6. The sinkholes weren't accidents, they were entry points." Most users ignored the post, A few mocked it, but one replied, anonymously, "You're right. But don't go to Coombs. It remembers better than the others." Stokes went anyway. He logged his trip in a series of increasingly erratic posts. The first was clinical measurements of rock composition, air humidity, sound behavior. But then, the tone shifted. The third post included a single grainy photograph, a limestone shelf smeared with what he claimed was hand-drawn ash, arranged in spirals around a wet hole in the rock. He captioned the photos. Rope went slack. No echo inside. No breeze. Just hush. 3 days later, he posted a short video. It's no longer available online, but archived comments from the forum suggest it depicted water flowing upward, not in a strong current, but in slow pulses, like breath through stone. His final post read, "If I'm gone by the time this uploads, don't let it forget my name." His wife reported him missing the next day. His car was found at the edge of Sulphur Bend, doors unlocked, gear packed. A lantern was resting beside the cave entrance, still warm. The official search lasted for days. One ranger was hospitalized. After a fall, he claimed the floor gave out under him, though no structural instability was ever recorded. Another refused to enter the cave entirely, citing a low hum like a hymn, but not in any human key. The sinkhole was declared sealed and unsafe. The report was filed under natural hazard. No body was recovered. The cave entrance was filled in with gravel and concrete. But something strange happened the following year. In 2004, a separate incident in nearby Perry County brought Stokes's name back into circulation, this time under disturbing circumstances. A middle school student, 13-year-old Jamie Whitlow, was caught carving a name into her desk during class. The name, Jeremiah Stokes. When asked who he was, she claimed, "He tells stories at night. He lives in the rocks. He has a light." Jamie had no known connection to the Stokes family. Her parents didn't recognize the name. She'd never left the state. Psychological evaluation suggested the carving was attention-seeking. She was placed in counseling, but in a school file later leaked to a journalist, her counselor's notes include a chilling entry. Jamie insists the man is not dead. She says he's part of the caves now, that he hums. 6 months later, another anomaly surfaced. A park ranger report filed in Harlan County after an unrelated incident included a written witness name at the bottom of the page. J. Stokes, in handwriting nearly identical to the missing man's 2003 spelunking log. The file was flagged, but no action taken. The park's internal server experienced a sync error that week. The report was archived incorrectly and later re-uploaded without the name. When analysts examined the signature in 2021 as part of an independent investigation, they confirmed with 98% certainty that it was written by the same hand as the original. Stokes' journal, there's no rational explanation for that, unless, of course, the caves don't just take people. They rewrite them. Jeremiah Stokes wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He wasn't a cultist. He was a meticulous researcher, a man who taught Appalachian history, who spent hours in public libraries, who annotated every document he found, and he followed a pattern of vanishing points no one else took seriously. But in following them, he became part of the pattern himself. One step too far, one echo too long, one name repeated in the wrong place. And now, that name reappears in odd corners of the archive, like it's learning how to stay. There's something uniquely terrifying about a man who saw the shape of a truth no one else wanted and walked into it, not by accident, but by conviction, a belief that the hollow wasn't isolated, that it was connected, that the caves weren't entrances, but records, storing memory in stone, echoing names that feed whatever waits beneath the skin of the mountain. And Jeremiah wasn't the first to say it. He was just the first to write it down where someone might read it. To understand the silence around Breath Hollow, you need to look not at who remembered, but at who chose to forget. In 1971, a group of 6 journalists from various Appalachian counties, led by a regional investigator named Glenn Watterson, began compiling interviews, photographs, and property records tied to the Colden family, the Listening House, and the old, unmapped cave systems buried beneath the ridges of McDowell and Clay County. Watterson had been tipped off by an anonymous letter mailed from Panther Ridge, containing only 3 items: a hand-drawn map, a 1951 photo of the Gallows Cradle Cave entrance, and a note that read, "They made a deal. Every 40 years. It remembers. Next is soon." The group's plan was simple: publish a multi-part exposé on the forgotten faiths of Appalachia. But within 3 months, the project had fallen apart. 2 of the journalists, Peter Doyle and Charlene Franks, died in separate vehicle fires. Neither showed signs of collision. Their vehicles had simply caught fire in the night, both parked on gravel roads less than 30 miles apart. Frank's notepad was found in the passenger seat, the edges burned but legible. The final line scrawled, "They don't bury the dead here. They fold them." Another member of the group, Milton Reyes, was committed to the Eastern State Hospital for acute hallucinatory paranoia. According to leaked intake files, he was found inside his home in Charleston, speaking in what was described as a reverse glossolalia, syllables that appeared to be English words spoken backward, but without breath between them. The remaining 3 journalists, including Watterson, disappeared from public life. Watterson's last known movement was a motel check-in near Brushy Ridge. He signed the logbook at 4:27 p.m. July 9, 1971. The room was later found undisturbed, the bed unslept in, the bathroom light left on. His duffel bag was open on the floor. Inside, topo maps, negatives, a dog-eared court ledger from McDowell County, and one red notebook with a string-bound spine. It contained a single sentence on the final page: "The cave only forgets if we do." That notebook is no longer in evidence. The motel owner, under state pressure, sold the remaining items to a private buyer in 1974. Attempts to trace the buyer's identity dead-ended. Records show the name C. Relin. No address, no tax ID, no further trace. The suppression didn't stop with individuals. It infected institutions. McDowell County Courthouse suffered a major archive fire in December 1953. Officially, the cause was listed as electrical overload in the file room panel, but photographs show no burn damage to walls or ceilings, only the file cabinets themselves. Metal warped, contents destroyed. Dozens of cases sealed under the statute community exception 1B. Gone. Among the destroyed files were property records for parcels adjacent to Breath Hollow court proceedings from the 1938 Ash Grove child disappearance, mental health filings related to a patient listed only as Cotton, a minor, and perhaps most telling, a sealed affidavit from a local pastor, titled Statement Regarding the Listening House Doctrine. None of these documents survive in duplicate. Their destruction effectively erased any legal paper trail tying Breath Hollow to active suppression or complicity, yet fragments remain, as they always do. One former deputy clerk from the courthouse, who worked during the time of the fire, left a handwritten letter with her daughter. The letter was only opened after her death in 2009. It reads, in part, "I saw men in suits from Charleston. Not locals. They didn't ask questions. They gave lists. Files to be pulled. Boxes to be left unlocked. They called it a hazard mitigation review. But I saw one man pocket a page. He said, 'Some names aren't safe in ink.' Another clue emerges from the Harlan County Historical Commission. A reel of 8mm film, mislabeled as 1932 Flood Damage Survey, was digitized in 2011 at the 6-minute mark. The film shows not flood footage, but a wide panning shot of a wooded slope. And at the edge of the frame, the listening house, intact, still standing. People can be seen gathered outside, unmoving. The film cuts abruptly after a brief exposure flicker. Film archivists later noted that the entire canister had been stored in a vault labeled contested, a designation normally used for legal hold materials or propaganda. No documentation exists explaining why it was there. But perhaps the most unsettling thread is this. Between 1950 and 1990, 4 different government departments, Geological Survey, State Health Office, Forestry Commission, and Homeland Affairs, established in the Cold War to monitor internal stability threats. All filed separate sealed reports involving Appalachian cave incidents. Each report uses different terminology: mineral anomaly, nonverbal, subject ritualized topology, ideological contagion, but all reference the same coordinates, and all 4 were marked observation only, no intervention, meaning the government knew about the disappearances. They knew about the families, the symbols, the rituals, the voices in the rocks, and they chose not to stop it, not because they were afraid of what was happening, but because stopping it might wake it. What kind of country files away dozens of disappearances as if they're seasonal events? What kind of system watches a town fold itself into the earth and signs a paper that says, "Let it"? Breath Hollow wasn't forgotten. It was buried on purpose, erased with intention, because some things, some names, are more dangerous remembered than dead. There's a house on the edge of County Route 28B. You won't find it on Google Maps. The satellite imagery blurs at that curve, always has, even in the updated tiles. If you trace the coordinates manually, the road simply stops, like the cartographers decided not to finish the drawing. But the house is real. You can find it on foot if you ignore the rusted gate with no lock. If you cross the stone line that's not a fence but feels like one, and if you keep walking even when it feels like you've walked too far for the distance shown on the map. Locals call it Colden's Place, though no one claims ownership. It's been there longer than any of the trailers on the main road, older than the gas station that closed in the 80s, older than the school the county built and unbuilt in the span of 10 years. A 1976 deed audit for McDowell County lists the structure as occupied dwelling, status unknown. The same audit references a refusal of entry during a property validation sweep. The field note reads, "Voice from within claimed no papers needed, claimed house had never left the earth, requested no further visits." No further visits were made, but others have found their way there. In 1999, 2 hikers documented the structure while exploring off-grid trails. They left a disposable camera in a mailbox nailed to the tree at the front path. When they returned to retrieve it 3 days later, the mailbox was gone. In its place was a small hand-drawn sign, "We don't keep your things. We only measure them." The photos they did recover were posted anonymously on an early internet forum. Blurry, low resolution, off angle. But two details stood out. First, the windows were dark from the inside, even when photographed at noon. Second, the front door bore 6 slashes, identical in placement and spacing to the 1916 chapel photo from Breath Hollow. That same year, one of the hikers, a man named Devon Albright, began keeping a private journal. In an entry dated October 4, 1999, he wrote, "It's not haunted. That's the wrong word. It's hollowed. Like the walls remember being deeper than they are. Like the insides bigger than the outside. Not in size, in waiting." In 2006, a self-described cryptid researcher named Howard Greaves made a solo trip to the house. He posted about it once in an obscure blog entry titled "Breathing Wood: Architecture as Memory." The post has since been removed, but an archived version remains. In it, he describes entering the house at twilight. He claimed that the floorboards hummed when he stepped, and that every room had one thing in common: no corners. According to Greaves, the rooms weren't square, they were slightly warped, like the edges of a dream misremembered. Every frame, every door, every window seemed to lean inward, just slightly, as though the house were folding into itself. A compression, a remembering. He stayed only 20 minutes. His final sentence reads, "There's music under the soil. You can't hum it. You can only follow it. The house has no driveway, no wires, no pipes." But county aerial photos taken during the 2020 fire season show something unnerving. While all surrounding vegetation appears sun-bleached and sparse, the land immediately around the house is lush, green, wild, like something underground is feeding it. Botanists, reviewing the photos, noted an unusual clustering of Deuterostromonium, jimsonweed, a toxic hallucinogen not native to that elevation, blooming unseasonably. The house appears to encourage what should not grow. Multiple attempts have been made to purchase the parcel, yet each transaction fails. Buyers back out. Deeds vanish. The land has been listed in 3 separate county auctions, each time marked with a final note: insufficient interest. Retain in county holding. But the house doesn't rot. The paint peels, the porch sags, but the structure holds, as if entropy were reluctant to take it, as if the wood had agreed to remain. And in the 2018 property audit, a new note appears in red ink. Presence reported by contractor. Heard breathing, no one present. Requesting parcel exemption. There is no record of the contractor's name, no follow-up. Visitors over the years have reported different anomalies: a compass that spins when placed on the floor footsteps above. Though the house has no second level, the sound of a child laughing, always from beneath doors that won't open unless you stop looking at them. One explorer claimed the house smelled like chalk and old milk. Another said the chimney dripped even when dry. But the most consistent report across decades is this: you never feel alone, but you never feel watched either. You feel remembered. The house sits exactly 2.3 miles from the center of what used to be Breath Hollow. Its foundation aligns with the old map's 6th cave entrance, and if you follow the crawl space downward, you'll find a narrow shaft sealed with iron bars on the underside of the lowest beam, in faint carving, barely visible unless lit. At the right angle, keep the mouth closed, or it will sing what it knows. The house has no listed builder, no original plans, no registered inspection, but it's still standing, still wrong, and waiting. The Coldens were not alone if you trace the disappearances backward, not through headlines, but through forgotten ledgers, school attendance, rosters, marriage certificates with no follow-ups. The names begin to echo, not as coincidence, but as recurrence. Surnames that appear once every few decades, always near the same ridgelines, always vanishing without resolution, always adjacent to a mouth in the earth. Rowan, Maddox, Greaves, Carruthers, Verne, not just names, but rituals, preserved in names. And across county lines, these names appear in places that should have no connection, different towns, different states, but always in proximity to unmapped depressions and collapsed cave systems. Take the Carruthers family. In 1948, a child was reported missing in Wayne County, WV. The case file, labeled Juvenile Wonder, notes a small handprint found in the dirt beside a collapsed root cellar. The mother claimed the child had been called to the orchard by a man who whispered his name 3 times. Police dismissed it as grief. But 2 years later, in Carter County, KY, another Carruthers child, different branch of the family, drew an image during Sunday school of a cave shaped like an ear. The teacher flagged the drawing. The child stopped speaking the next day. The teacher's own record of the event was found decades later in an attic, folded into the back of a hymnal. Her marginal note read, "Different child, same listening." The Maddox name surfaces in Perry County, 1953, when a man named Simeon Maddox filed a court petition to block the construction of a public trail near what he referred to as the Singing Hole. His petition includes this chilling sentence: "There are names that should never be near wind again." He withdrew the complaint a month later and left town. No forwarding address. Then there's the Greaves lineage, a line traced to at least 6 separate psychiatric holds between 1935 and 1980, all in different counties, each case mentioning recurring dreams of hollow feet or teeth in the walls. In one file, a Dr. Luther Miles writes, "This patient exhibits strong ancestral delusion, believes his family has a responsibility to feed stories to the soil, not bodies, but words. Calls it keeping the memory asleep, the Rowans. Meanwhile, had the most overt symbol. Their descendants were often associated with spiral carvings, found on barn doors, on birth certificates, even tattooed behind one child's ear, a child who disappeared in 1977 after walking into a drainage tunnel in Pike County. The family claimed he was following a song no one else could hear. He was never found. But 1 year later, a ranger stationed at Breaks Interstate Park reported discovering a child's backpack near an unmarked cave. The same spiral carved into the leather. That cave was later collapsed intentionally, but not by the state, by local volunteers. They brought no equipment, just shovels and hymnals. These names weren't just bloodlines, they were roles, carriers of memory, keepers of the threshold, not worshippers, witnesses, bound by belief or fear or both to the same unspoken rituals. Children taught not to cry, because noise wakes the stone doors, scratched 6 times before opening shoes removed at dusk. So, footsteps wouldn't be remembered, birthdays recorded without years, stories told only at night. Never written down. One high school principal in Letcher County in the 1980s noted that certain students, all with ancestral ties to those holler names, would go silent every October, refuse to participate in music classes, and avoid shadowed hallways. When asked why, one student replied, "That's the month the mouth's open. Mama says don't sing or it'll answer. These weren't just superstitions. They were seasonal rituals of forgetting, and they always circled back to caves. In 6 counties, archival maps show clusters of surnames near old sinkholes, property transfers with missing tax IDs, marriages that list the same name twice, the bride and groom recorded under the same last name, but listed as not related. And then the gaps, years when no one is born, gravestones with no death dates, land ownership frozen in time, same name, same plot, new decade, like the names never left, like they circled, folded inward, and began again. It's a pattern that mirrors the spiral, not a symbol of growth, but of containment, names tightening, memories repeating, until the spiral reaches its center and disappears. On March 12, 2022, 71 years to the day after the gallows cradle disappearance, a second-grade teacher in Buchanan County, Virginia flagged a drawing during quiet time. The child had used charcoal, not crayon. The picture showed a map, not a scene. A series of ridges, drawn in unnerving detail for a 7-year-old, with 6 spiral symbols along the folds of the valleys. At the bottom of the page, written in block letters, "These are the places it wakes." When asked what the drawing was, the boy answered, "It's where my real family sings." Child Protective Services was alerted. The parents, confused and alarmed, insisted they had no knowledge of Breath Hollow, nor any connection to the surnames listed in previous generations. But a follow-up genealogy report revealed that the mother's grandmother, whose name was never spoken in the household, was a Maddox that same week. A maintenance worker at Breaks Interstate Park filed a routine report. A collapsed vent in a drainage tunnel had revealed an opening into a previously unmapped cavern. When rangers investigated, they found no cave entrance, only damp earth and the faint smell of sulfur and milk. They sealed it and moved on, but reports continued to build. April 2022, a woman in Greenup, Kentucky, reported her daughter waking up with dirt under her fingernails, though her bedroom was on the 2nd floor and windows remained locked. June 2022, a camper posted a trail cam image of a person standing still for 3 hours at the edge of his site, facing a slope known locally as the Hollow Yawn. The figure disappeared between frames, no footsteps, no motion blur, no departure. July 2022, a Reddit user shared a story about his niece, sleep-speaking in a voice that sounded like a grown man. She said only one phrase, over and over. "It's remembering now." These aren't stories from the 1930s or 1950s. They're now. And their widening Facebook groups devoted to Appalachian folklore have quietly begun compiling what they call resonance events. The criteria are simple. A previously dormant cave reopens. A child speaks a name they shouldn't know. A visitor goes missing and is later remembered differently, as if they'd always been gone, even when photos say otherwise. It's happening with greater frequency. But it's not just about caves reawakening. It's about memory returning. Memory as contagion. In September 2022, a local pastor in Floyd County reported that 3 members of his congregation began humming the same unfamiliar tune during communion, a tune no one had taught them. When asked what it was, one replied, "The song our grandmother sang when the house turned to stone." The pastor dismissed it as nonsense until he found the exact phrase in a 1942 field report about the cold ENS. The humming isn't metaphor, it's literal in isolated reports. People describe hearing tones, not voices, not words, but vibrations, deep and steady, like a hum from inside the land. Some say it resonates in their bones. Others say it only happens underground, but it stays with them afterward, like an invisible melody they can't shake. In audio terms, it's called subsonic resonance, frequencies below the level of human hearing, but capable of triggering unease, disorientation, even hallucinations. But here's the thing. Subsonic resonance doesn't occur naturally in solid limestone. Not unless something is moving. In October 2022, geologists detected microtremors beneath the Tug River Basin, a seismically stable region. The readings didn't match tectonic activity or mining patterns. Instead, they followed a spiral arc, 6 pulses, one after another, then silence, not a tremor, a signal. The caves are returning, not physically, psychologically. They're surfacing in drawings, in dreams, in stories that shouldn't exist. Because what was buried isn't just beneath our feet, it's beneath our history. A woman in Elkhorn, WV, filed a complaint in November. Her son had begun talking about someone called the Remembering Man. When shown a list of Appalachian surnames, he pointed to Relin. When asked how he knew that name, he said, "He wrote it in my closet." Sure enough, carved into the drywall of the boys' room behind a rack of toys was a single word, in backward lettering. Relin. The woman had never heard the name, but you have. And so has this story, again and again and again. What if this isn't new? What if every 40 to 50 years, the same story climbs out of the same hole, wearing different faces, using different names, speaking through new mouths? Not a haunting, a retelling, because the caves aren't the threat. The caves are the archive, and it's time they were opened again. The first time the name appeared in an official record was 1931. A ranger's field report from Buchanan County, Virginia, documenting a disturbance near a partially collapsed coal tunnel, ends with a witness statement signed C. Relin. No address, no occupation, just the name printed in clean cursive. But that was only the beginning. Over the next 90 years, C. Relin would resurface again and again in case files, sign-in sheets, medical logs, even property transfers, always tied to events near unmarked cave systems, always as a witness, never as a victim, never as a suspect. The peculiar thing wasn't the recurrence, it was the consistency. In 1953, a patient at Eastern State Hospital in Lexington was admitted for catatonic withdrawal. The intake form listed the emergency contact as C. Signed in pen. In 1975, a park ranger documented an interaction with a man offering directions near the Ashgrove Caverns trailhead. The man signed his name in the incident book, C. Relin, in 1990. A funeral home ledger from Pikeville includes the name as a witness to the burial of an unidentified male infant found near Panther Ridge. Same signature. In 2009, a ranger's station logbook at Breaks Interstate Park, following a cave collapse incident, notes that C. Relin was present, gave a statement, and left. The line where he was supposed to enter his address is filled with a single word. Below, handwriting experts analyzed 3 of these signatures in 2014 during an independent study on regional folklore. The result was conclusive, not just similar, identical. No variation in loop form, pen pressure, or slant. Not merely consistent, preserved. How can a person sign the same name the same way over 8 decades without aging, without error, unless it's not a person, unless it's a function, a name that doesn't belong to a body, but to a role, like watchman, or keeper, or mouth. The name C. Relin has no recorded social security number, no census entries, no birth or death certificate, but the name has shown up on official paperwork, enough that multiple county systems now flag it automatically. An internal memo from the Kentucky Department of Environmental Protection, circulated in 2017, instructs field agents: if the name C. Relin appears on any geological survey or site log, contact your regional supervisor immediately. Do not engage. Do not attempt further documentation. No explanation is provided, but in a leaked annex to that memo, later published by an online folklorist group. One section is especially disturbing. Relin is believed to be a continuity marker. Do not repeat the name aloud more than twice. Prior cases indicate increasing site activity, auditory anomalies, and spiral formations in proximity following third utterance. Not legend, policy, filed in an official state document. And yet, the name remains. In church rosters, on substitute teacher logs, even in cave tourism, GUESTBOOKS. In one case, a family visiting Mammoth Cave in 1993 reported seeing a signature in the guest book, C. Relin, hometown, Colden Hollow. The family was from Ohio. They knew nothing of Appalachian history. But when the father looked back through his camcorder footage of the trip, he saw something he hadn't noticed at the time: a man, blurred in the background of their cave tour, standing near the mouth of a closed tunnel, still watching, wearing what looked like a suit that didn't fit the decade. They never found that footage again. It was overwritten. By what, they never figured out. But they remember the name, because when they returned home, their 7-year-old began whispering it in her sleep. 3 times, always 3. When asked who told her, she said, "The man in the hole with the paper mouth." Theories abound. Some say Relin was the original founder of Breath Hollow. Others say it's not a man at all, but a memory. A cave-bound intelligence that wears the name like a jacket, speaking through whoever dares remember it too clearly. But the strangest pattern of all is this: whenever C. Relin is named in an official record, the record is eventually and inexplicably lost. Every file mentioned earlier, the Ranger's 1931 report, the funeral ledger from 1990, the sign-in sheet from 1975, all vanished from the physical archive, preserved only in photocopies, notes, and second-hand references. It's as if the name doesn't just survive history, it rewrites it, speaks itself aloud, slips into the ledger, then seals the page behind it. Not erased, just made unprovable. There's something unspeakably terrifying in that. Not a monster, not a scream, but a name that doesn't belong in the present, and yet always returns. And now you know it too. And now it's in here. Typed, read, repeated dot. And the pattern continues. It wasn't an archive. It was a box mislabeled in a flood inventory list, recovered in 2007 from the sub-basement of a decommissioned records building in Charleston. The box was cardboard, water-damaged, and warped along the edges. No departmental seal, just the handwritten phrase. Inside were loose papers, no folder tabs, no structure. A birth certificate with no name. A musical staff filled with rhythmic notations, but no melody. A page torn from a geological survey marked with 6 red spirals, each intersected with a downward-pointing arrow. At the bottom of the pile was a laminated card, likely from a ranger's identification badge. The name field was blacked out, but the back of the badge held an address. Not a mailing address, a GPS coordinate. When plotted, it led to a wooded slope just southeast of what used to be Breath Hollow, land now considered uninhabited, overgrown, quiet. But the elevation gain at that coordinate is off by 4 meters compared to both older and current maps. For meters missing beneath. The recovery team visited the site in 2008. There was no trail, no ruins, just stone and silence. But the soil tested negative for bedrock presence. Beneath the surface was hollow space, unmapped, unentered. They didn't dig. The site was logged as geological irregularity, no hazard, and then forgotten. Again, this is where the pattern completes itself. A town not lost, but redacted. A church not burned, but folded. Names not erased, absorbed. Surnames carried through children who no longer recognize the stories in their sleep. A house that refuses to collapse. A name that signs itself into history and erases the ink behind it. A cave that does not echo, it records. And through it all, the silence, curated, layered, generational. Because silence is not absence in these places, it's compliance. A pact made long ago, not to bury the past, but to hide the path back to it. And yet here we are. It's no longer folklore. It's a pattern with timestamps and coordinates and matching handwriting that doesn't age. It's in the audio logs, in the cave resonance maps, in the stories children whisper before they even know what they're saying. It's in the hush between words when a family member stops short of telling you where your great-grandmother was born. It's in the land that's still green in December when everything else has died. It's in the hymns that don't appear in any book, but hum themselves into your chest when you stand too long near a mouth in the earth. You weren't supposed to find this dot, not the map, not the spirals, not the 6th cave, and definitely not the name that keeps reappearing, but something wanted you to look, because it's happening again, not as a haunting, as a recurrence. The spiral doesn't open outward, it pulls inward, and now you've taken the first step, the last note found in the box, hastily written in pencil, likely by someone who never meant for it to be seen, reads, "When enough remember, it won't need to be buried anymore." And that's the final horror, isn't it? That this was never a secret. It was a ritual, one that requires remembering to be complete. And by watching, by listening, by tracing the spirals, you've become part of it. The caves don't need your body. They need your memory. They feed on story. And this one now is yours too. If this story matched your family's silence, if a cabin was never spoken of, if the name Relin means nothing and yet feels wrong in your mouth, then write it. Let us see what they tried to erase, and subscribe, because even this video might vanish tomorrow. Asterisk.